Welcome everybody to our Leaders in Housing Counseling call. Glad to have you today. We continue to hear really great reports about the work being done in the field and appreciate the fact that you're champions for people in really difficult times and appreciate the extra effort people have been doing. It's pretty exciting to hear the great work that's been going out in the field. We're going to do another session on rental counseling, and I think this will be a lot our focus today because, as you know, it's been an area that we really need to expand housing counseling in, and there'll be a special emphasis on how to actually fund the work. Continue doing pieces on rental counseling and want to be a support to what you're doing out in the field. Certainly, if there are things that we're not covering that you're doing right now, we want to know about them because we'll be able to feature them in future sessions. So please reach out to us and let us know what you're doing in the field that's been working. We're going to start with legislative updates and what's the progress on housing counseling funding, especially. Quick update on the servicer contact list, our directory, which are getting wide circulation. We're pretty pleased about that, and we hope it's working for you. And very interested if you have servicers that are not on the list that you need. We're trying to get a number of the regulators to become more involved in helping us fill in the holes here. But it'd be helpful to know where the greatest need is. We're going to spend most of the call on potential funding sources for rental counseling. And we have Sarah Sadie, and we're very pleased to have her from the National Low Income Housing Coalition, obviously a leading figure. Her organization is doing very valuable work in the field, and they're area experts, particularly in this work, and have done a lot to shape what the funding looks like. And we're really pleased to have them again on the call. We'll have Tiffany Ang, who's also been on in the past, and she's got some interesting ideas about why COVID-19 tracking might help in defining the crisis and what we need to accomplish. And then we have a number of local groups doing their work and how they fund it and what it looks like. So Laura Feltz from the United Tenants from Albany, Russell Graves from the National Foundation for Debt Management, Lois Healy from Affordable Home Ownership Foundation in Florida, and Justina Fife from the United Community Action Network. We'll do a quick short plug on membership dues, and maybe also a big thank you. I know that groups that are under tremendous financial pressure, it's fine to not step up right now, but we've been really impressed how many of you have, and we appreciate that deeply. This gives us flexibility to do the work we do. And then we'll talk a little bit more, we'll have Ellie talk a little bit more about the call next week, but as you may know, there's been a lot of issues around credit reporting, credit scores, the impact of these forbearance deals. And we're bringing a deep area expert in this field from FinReg Lab, and Kelly Cochran. She'll give us a really deep dive into how these work mechanically, why the legislation didn't quite go far enough, and some ideas about solutions. But she is somebody who's deeply in the weeds of credit reports in a way, even though you all spend a lot of time in credit reports, she's been a lot deeper. So this is an opportunity also to raise a variety of questions. She's really a technician in this world and has lots of knowledge. So stay tuned for that next week. You know, we keep saying, oh, we're going to go back to our twice a month calls as soon as things settle down, but guess what? They're not settling down yet. I'll also make one more quick plug, which is that in 2 weeks, we're going to do, we kind of treat it as a town hall with, what we want to do is hear from you about what you're experiencing with the servicers, what's working for your clients, and especially what's not working. We did a meeting with Kathy Kraninger from CFPB last week, which really opened up a whole set of issues that we thought that, and we've gotten 6 counseling agencies represented on that. we thought this is really time to hear exactly what's happening in the field. And happy to hear about success stories too. I think we want to know what the color and texture is. So that'll be in 2 weeks. So with that, let's pivot to Melody and her work in Congress. And where are things at, Melody?
Thanks, Bruce. Hello, everyone. Happy Thursday. I'll just jump right into it. As folks may have heard last week, the HEROES Act, which is being considered Stimulus 4.0, passed the House. Housing counseling assistance got $100 million, as well as a inclusion in the legislative text that equipment and technology would be used as eligible expenses. So just some background on some of our work and why we're really excited that housing counseling has sort of come to the forefront of housing issues in the national conversation due to the current as well as potential eviction and foreclosure crisis facing Americans in every single state. Housing counseling has definitely been raised to the top of a lot of housing conversations. And so we had great support in the House, but in particular with the House Financial Services and Appropriations chairs, Chairman Price from North Carolina, Ranking Member Diaz-Balart from the House T-HUD Appropriations Subcommittees, as well as Chairman Maxine Waters, who was just a rock star on housing issues this Congress. The $100 million was a smaller figure than we were originally hoping for. We worked really closely with House Financial Services as well as Representative Axney, Democrat from Iowa, and we were hopeful for $700 million, but we heard that there were a few concerns about that figure. Primarily, we heard that the Speaker wanted the total funding package for the HEROES Act to be approximately $3 trillion. And so there was a lot of considerations made, and obviously they wanted some programs to be shorter than that because there were a lot of priorities. In addition, we also heard that there was a concern for earmarks. So as we said in the previous call last week, we were working closely with House Financial Services on what would be the funding vehicle to sort of get money out of the door. And we heard from different organizations and considerations, and we thought that NeighborWorks would be the best funding vehicle, similar to what was done with the National Foreclosure Mitigation Counseling Program during the Great Recession, the foreclosure crisis then, because some advocates had concerns about the speed to which HUD would be able to get funds out of the door. But ultimately, the change was that it would be HUD Housing Counseling Office that would distribute the funds. And if you can go back, Ellie. In addition, we heard directly from counselors during this time, and we wanted to ensure that the legislative and text included equipment and technology so that counselors will be able to use their grant money in order to do mobile counseling and do virtual services. So we're really happy that they recognize this need as well and included that language in the final text of the bill, which passed the House. Next slide, please. Thank you. So now the HEROES Act is over in the Senate. We had a great starting call with Senator Menendez, the Democrat from New Jersey, his staff. Senator Menendez is a longtime supporter of housing counseling, and he every year circulates a Dear Colleague letter to his Senate colleagues on housing counseling funding. So he's an excellent partner of ours, and we always check back with his office on, strategy for the Senate. And we found that Senate Democrats are considering, in drafting their own package, the original $700 million that was in the original House HEROES Act language that ultimately didn't pass the House, but we're very excited to hear that. And we discussed that they're also supportive of using NeighborWorks as that vehicle to get funds out, given the previous concerns about HUD. So we're really excited to hear that. We're not exactly sure when that legislation will drop. They're still sort of finalizing legislative language and funding levels. But in our conversations, they told us that they would like to have Republican Senate support, as this would make it much easier for any legislation to pass the Senate. They're primarily looking at Senate banking and appropriations Republicans, as they're the Republicans that you would want to have sort of voice their support for a program when they discuss things with chairs. Some of the Republicans that come to my mind immediately that we would absolutely love to have their support for this legislation, and so would Senate Democrats. Chairman Crapo from Banking, Senator Shelby, Appropriations Chair. Republicans from Senate Banking would be Kennedy from Louisiana, Scott from South Carolina, Portman from Ohio, McSally from Arizona, as well as Maura Capito from West Virginia, Senator Graham from South Carolina, Senator Alexander from Tennessee, Senator Blunt from, forgive me, Missouri, Boozman from Arkansas, and then as well as Daines from Montana. Those are just some of them that come off the top of my head. But obviously, we would want support from the larger committees as well as those who aren't on banking and appropriations. One of the rock stars would be Senator Young from Indiana, who's been a really big supporter of affordable housing issues. We've tried many times to connect with his office, and we were successful a few times, admittedly, but they're definitely in demand at the Senate. But those are just a few of the members that we would love to reach out to and get support. We're currently reaching out to them for phone calls, potentially conference calls. So we have some lined up right now to discuss housing counseling with these offices. But since we're not sure when the bill will drop, we're hearing some things like maybe mid-June or July. I'm sure Sarah will have more to talk on that with timeline, but we do have time to do targeted outreach. Now I'll send it back to Bruce.
Great. Well, and obviously this is critical work. So certainly, if any of the people that Melody listed off are your senators, please reach out to let Melody know, and maybe we could do something jointly as well. We have done a number of calls with many of these offices, with lots of the local counseling groups, and this is a critical moment right now, and it's a tricky place to navigate to get to the point where there'll be another bill coming out, but it's critical that we be part of that bill, and we're hoping to see a strong level of funding. So certainly, if you hear from Melody about being invited to be part of one of these calls, jump on that right away. We really need your expertise on these calls to help close the support gap here. Great, thanks
Bruce?
Everybody. Yes.
I just want to jump in quickly and would like to reiterate that if any funding for housing counseling around COVID-19 goes through NeighborWorks, that does not mean that it would only go to NeighborWorks organizations. Just want to clarify that it would work just like the NFMC funds worked, where NeighborWorks managed it, but any HUD-approved housing counseling agency could apply for it.
Absolutely, and I should just say that we have kind of a plan for whether it's HUD as a vehicle or NeighborWorks as the vehicle. We have got some thoughts and are contributing to ideas to get the money out as quickly as possible, to have the flexibility, and to help meet the outreach and technology needs that many of the local organizations have. So I think either one we can make work in strong ways, and we're just managing to try to get one of those to be the vehicle and well funded. But thanks for bringing that up, Ellie. I know that's a question that comes up regularly. Good. Let's move on to the main part of our agenda. So pleased to have Sarah Sadian on. Oh, with servicer contacts, left out a piece. Thank you for that. So hopefully everybody's now using our servicer directory, and especially the counselor one. If you don't happen to know the password, just email Ellie or me, and we'd be happy to give it to you. You should have it already, but it hasn't changed. It's now on the website, so you can go directly to our website. Actually, the links are here, so you can use that way to get in, and you can always find it through our website. We've been updating it. Ellie's actually regularly updating the lists, so we've been adding servicers and improving on the contact list that we've got. We're doing more work to get more servicers on board, and that so we'll continue updating it and improving on it. And just so you're aware, there's two lists, two directories. One is for consumers, so that is what are the consumer-facing channels, and that's really for the public at large, and that's available without a password protection. And you can give that to partners and use it any way that you find useful. We have the one with the counselors that's password protected. That's obviously exclusive to HUD-approved housing counseling agencies. That will give you email contacts, give you telephone numbers, will often give you individuals to work with. And we're also really working hard to get escalation contacts. So where the first round doesn't work, we can appeal to senior managers and do problem solving to get some of these cases done. And we're really trying to replicate what were the best practices of the foreclosure crisis in a new crisis and get this list out and available faster than those happened back in the day. And one thing to think about is if there are services that are not on this list, please let us know right away. We know that we're trying to get a broader pool in, but if there are ones that are particularly important to your work, we'd love to know that and escalate that as well. So let us know. And if there are any problems with the list, we'd love to hear that as well. We know that these things change sometimes. Good. There to be used, and hopefully it's helpful to you. Great. Now let's go to the main part of our agenda. I'm pleased to say that Sarah Sadian is here from the National Low Income Housing Coalition to talk about about the CARES Act and especially the provisions, the housing provisions, and then the homeless provisions, ESG grants that would be useful, especially with the lens of this work that we do that would impact the rental counseling work that many of us are doing and many of us are beginning to get into. So Sarah, please take it away.
Great. Thank you so much for having me on. Happy to share with you the information we have on the CARES Act and what resources we're hearing or pushing for in the next package too. The CARES Act, if we can go to the next slide, included $2 trillion in direct spending, including $12 billion in HUD program resources. I'll say that I think folks were really surprised to see housing and homelessness included in the CARES Act. And I'm sure that has a large part to do with the work that you and your organization, your networks have been doing to lift up the need for these resources. So thank you so much for your advocacy. I'll go into a little bit about what those resources are, but I also want to point out that the bill included non-spending protections for renters and for homeowners, including moratoriums on evictions and foreclosures that I'll talk about in greater detail. The next slide. So the one major resource included in the CARES Act was $4 billion in emergency solutions grants. These are HUD funds that are used to serve people experiencing homelessness. And there's a broad use of the funds that you can be looking for in your community. I think the primary focus of these funds is to help homeless service providers decongest shelters so that they can practice social distancing, and to move people who are unsheltered into hotels and motels so that they can quarantine and isolate safely during the pandemic. An important piece of these funds I'll point out is that there's a restriction on the funds that prevent HUD or from any local government from imposing requirement for treatment or for other prerequisites as a condition of this funding. We've been engaging in a big battle with the administration over the Housing First model, which prioritizes housing and services first before people receive assistance for other challenges that they might be dealing with. So it was really important that that requirement is in the bill, but the rest of the funds can be used really flexibly. In addition to the resources I mentioned, the funds can also be used for rapid rehousing and housing stabilization services. So that might be something that's helpful for you as housing counselors to know about. Next slide. The next large pot of resources in the CARES Act are Cdbg funds, $5 billion in funds. The bill includes really broad authority to be given to the HUD secretary to ensure that the dollars can flow as quickly as possible and to meet a really broad range of needs. We have seen communities use CDBG for emergency rental assistance already. That's an allowable use under the current CDBG rules. You can provide up to 3 months of rental assistance, but we're encouraging HUD to waive that and to set a larger time frame at 6 months or even longer. States are starting to set up those funds. I mentioned that includes Maine, examples from Montana and other, Arizona, Florida, are using CDBG dollars to help address those emergency needs. So this is a really important flexible pot of money that can be used to keep renters in their homes. Lastly, I'll mention a plus up for some key HUD programs, including housing choice vouchers, TBRA, and project-based rental assistance. Much of these funds are aimed at serving existing households, whether through adjustments to their tenant contributions as incomes decline, or to help address other administrative or operating costs that housing providers might have during this crisis. If we could go to the next slide, that'd be great. So our understanding is that this is the TBRA funds are written flexibly enough to possibly be used for new vouchers, but the primary focus of it is just to adjust the existing revenue amounts, renewal amounts. Next slide is for tribal housing and HOPLA. We are seeing a huge outbreak of coronavirus in tribes, among tribes. Part of that is because of the severe overcrowding in many tribal communities. Tribes tend to have the worst housing conditions in America, and I think we're seeing an outbreak of coronavirus there specifically for that reason. So the bill included $300 million to address tribal housing needs. We're hearing that a lot more is needed in the next package, but at least that provides an initial amount of funding that can be used to, again, decongest housing environments and allow people to self-quarantine and to acquire additional space to allow that to happen. Tribal housing dollars tend to be very flexibly written because of the sovereignty issues involved, and so tribes will have a broad amount of uses for those dollars. The bill also included $65 million for HOPLA, a lot of, again, flexible uses of those funds. It can not only be used to adjust for rental renewals, but there's also flexible provisions in there to allow dollars to be used to serve other members of the household as needed. Moving along to the next slide, funding for Section 202 and 811 and fair housing activities. There were some limited funds for those purposes, $50 million for Section 202, $15 million for 811, and $2.5 million for fair housing activities. I will say I think in the next bill we'll see a much larger increase in funding for fair housing activities. There's a lot of recognition that this crisis is exposing underlying racial biases and discrimination in the housing market, and that there's a need for additional funds there. Moving along to the next slide, there's a significant pot of funds that we hope you are paying very close attention to. I know we are. $150 billion in what's called the Coronavirus Relief Fund. This is a very flexible pot of money that state and local governments will receive directly, and that they can use to cover any necessary expenditures incurred due to the public health emergency. Essentially, it allows each state and local government to decide for themselves what is quote unquote necessary. And so that can include funding for to serve people who are experiencing homelessness, or for emergency rental assistance and other resources to serve renters and homeowners. The Treasury Department has put out guidance expressly stating that emergency rental assistance is an allowable use of the funds, and it could in fact be used for other forms of housing assistance, including permanent construction, though limited in many circumstances. The important thing there is for you to continue to work with your state and local governments to urge them to define housing as being a necessary expenditure. Moving along to the next slide, I wanted to focus on the eviction and foreclosure moratoriums that are in the CARES Act. First, it included a 60-day moratorium on foreclosures for homeowners, although that can be extended. There is also a 120-day moratorium on eviction filings for renters, but only those in federally backed mortgages. So there's some limitations on that eviction moratorium. First, it only applies to non-payment of rent. And two, it has to be covered by either federally assisted housing or mortgages that are backed by Fannie Mae, Freddie Mac, and FHA. So there's a limited pool for whom that eviction moratorium would apply. It's really important that this was provided in the CARES Act, but there have been enormous challenges for renters to figure out whether or not they are covered by these protections. That is because while there is data that is out there about federally assisted housing, definitely, it is harder for renters to figure out information about whether or not their landlord's mortgage is covered by FHA, Fannie Mae, or Freddie Mac. So there's an information gap there. Some of that information is not made publicly available in any forum, which has allowed some landlords to move forward with illegal evictions, which we're very, very concerned about. Going forward, next slide, please. I will say that we were really pleased to see some additions and fixes to the CARES Act included in the HEROES Act that was passed last week by the House, as was mentioned earlier by Melody. One really important feature of that bill is that it includes $11.5 billion in emergency solutions grants. This is the full amount that is needed to allow for social distancing and self-quarantining and self-isolation for people experiencing homelessness, whether sheltered or unsheltered. We're really glad to see that that was included in the bill. Second, there is a national uniform moratorium on evictions and foreclosures. As I mentioned earlier, it was very hard for renters to figure out if they were covered. There's state and local moratoriums that are now close to expiring, creating a patchwork of solutions, but creating a lot of confusion in the interim. A national uniform moratorium is included in the bill. It would provide protections for nearly all homeowners and renters for a year, regardless of whether or not the housing that they live in is federally assisted or not. And lastly, a major priority for us has been emergency rental assistance and eviction prevention. The House bill included $100 billion in emergency rental assistance through the Emergency Rental Assistance and Rental Market Stabilization Act that was introduced by Senator Brown and Representatives Heck and Waters. We are trying to do as much as we can to coalesce Democrats around this proposal. The bill now has 145 co-sponsors in the House, 35 co-sponsors in the Senate, all Democrats. But we see that the path forward to that is really about making sure that this housing resources and homelessness resources are a top priority for Democrats as they head into negotiations. We're starting to see some progress there. Speaker Pelosi has never really been one to focus too much on housing in the past, but more recently she's made really helpful comments about how emergency rental assistance is needed and is included in the HEROES Act. So we see that as a positive sign going forward, and we urge you guys to help us with advocacy, reach out to your members of Congress to encourage them to support these measures and others. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bruce.
Excellent. Thank you so much. And we're going to hold questions until we talk with Tiffany Ang, and then we'll do questions for both of them in a few minutes. So let's move on to Tiffany from Grounded Solutions. She's got an interesting thoughts on how to track COVID-19 cases and how that might be able to be useful in our work. Tiffany.
Hi, everyone. Hope everyone's healthy and safe. Thanks, Bruce and Ellie, for hosting, giving me some time to share my thoughts on the exciting topic of data management and why I think you should all be carefully tracking the impact of this pandemic on your work. I think this is especially important now as you may be developing new programs or new service lines or seeking funding opportunities at the local or national level. So for some background, Homekeeper is a Salesforce app. It's a HUD-approved counseling management system for various homeownership and housing counseling programs. It can also be used to manage emergency mortgage and rental assistance programs if you're starting some of those up. We work with over 100 participating housing organizations, and about a third of them are housing counseling agencies reporting to 13 intermediaries. So just to connect the dots, Homekeeper is a program of Grounded Solutions Network where I work. Grounded Solutions is a national member-based nonprofit, and we advance housing solutions that last for generations. So our Homekeeper team spends a lot of time helping organizations work more efficiently and become more data-driven. So no surprise, lately we've been thinking a lot about what that means in the era of COVID-19. Next slide. There's been a big spotlight on the importance of data, as you all know, in the midst of this pandemic. And there's one lesson that I really just wanted to focus on today, and that's simply put, when we lack the data, we lack the answers. And as you've probably read about, by simply failing to track something so simple as a small flag as to whether or not someone affected by COVID is a healthcare worker, experts and researchers, all of us, were unable to really fully measure the toll of the pandemic on our front lines. So unfortunately, when we lack the data, we lack the answers. Next slide. But housing counselors, we can do better as a sector. At Homekeeper, we do believe that better data leads to deeper insights and bigger impact. And I know managing data is probably not the most rewarding part of your job. I'm sure the last thing you need is someone coming to you on this call and saying you should track more data unrelated to your 9902. But our clients and our communities are counting on you, and with a few adjustments, you'll have the data you need to tell compelling stories about the effects of COVID-19 on your work. Next slide. So where do you start? I'd start by asking your colleagues, having some conversations about what are the data-driven storylines that you want to tell in this COVID-19 era. So I've listed a few themes. These are themes that resonate in or out of a pandemic, but focus on, who are we serving? What kinds of services and programs do we have? How successful are these programs? What's the economic impact? And how is our work changing because of the pandemic? So as one example of what I call a data-driven storyline, Opal Community Land Trust, one of our Homekeeper housing counseling users from Washington State, they recently created a new community-funded COVID rental assistance program, rental and mortgage assistance program. And they distributed $125,000 in rental and mortgage assistance and paid 131 months of housing payments over the last 2 months. So data-driven storylines like these are compelling and important for attracting support and resources for your program. So to tell these stories, we're recommending that all counseling programs put in place systems now that allow you to identify households and cases as whether or not it's related to the COVID-19 at the time of intake. So not all of them will be. Each case record should track how that individual or family is being impacted by the pandemic. So assuming pandemic tracking isn't something you're used to doing, I have a few do-it-yourself tips. Don't overthink it. It's not rocket science. But the key is to be able to segment your data and your reporting so you can tag cases and isolate those caseloads, your activities and clients before, during, and after the pandemic. So you can customize your CMS to flag the cases. If you're a Homekeeper user, we're going to be releasing new features this summer to allow you to do just that. But if you don't have that option, consider other searchable tags in your case notes, or set baselines and milestones, such as the date you moved your counseling to be fully remote, or the date the moratoriums in your area expired. And just consider what other intake questions that would be supplemental to your existing processes, and update all of your forms or checklists to assist with those data collections. And lastly, track those metrics regularly and look for trends and insights. So if you're an intermediary or subgrantee, and or part of another related network, think about what it would take to track and compare similar COVID-related metrics across your networks. Seems ambitious, but think about the questions we could answer for the sector if we had the data and we worked together. So, are our policies working? How are communities of color being affected? And how are we making a difference? So this is just a challenge for folks working within networks or coordinating at regional levels. Something to think about. So really only then would we be able to fully appreciate the lasting effects of the pandemic and the role that your organizations and the sector as a whole play in responding to these community needs. So to summarize, now's the time to make a plan, put in new tracking systems in place as needed, talk to your partners, your stakeholders, review your current systems, agree on metrics, think through challenges, and train your staff. As we've all painfully learned, it's never too early to plan for an emergency or a disaster, and it's never too late to respond. It's no different with data collection. Next slide. Finally, I'd want to encourage you all to continue this conversation within your networks. And I personally would love to hear from you. I get excited about this type of thing. So maybe just type in the chat box, share with us, contact us through our website. What are some of your experiences and lessons learned from the past? And how are you segmenting your files? And what are the data-driven stories that you are hoping to tell, hopefully when this is all over or as you're seeking funding or new partners? Lastly, if you're interested in reading more on this topic, I wrote a short blog post just expanding on some of this presentation. You can find it on our Homekeeper website. And lastly, thanks for hearing me out. Good luck. Feel free to reach out and connect. And thanks for everything you and your colleagues are doing in your communities to respond to your clients' needs today and in the coming days and months. I do value your work, and I hope I got you motivated and thinking about how to measure and share your outcomes going forward.
Thank you, Tiffany. That was great. So before we jump into questions, let me ask a question quickly of Sarah. So the audience here is largely, they're all local groups, and CARES Act has provided more funding, and you mentioned couple different opportunities in terms of rental subsidies, which would be critical for people. Do you have some thoughts about when the money will flow, how groups could influence where it goes? What are their next steps in their locality to be able to encourage this funding and have it go to renters who are in trouble?
That's a great question. For ESG and CDBG dollars, those funds go to both state and local governments. So to the extent that you know your local CDBG grantee, you should be engaging with them about using those funds. CRF funds go directly to your state governor. It actually technically goes to your state treasury office, but your state governor has enormous discretion in how to use those funds. And so I encourage you to work with others in your state to encourage your governor to allocate some of those funds for housing and homelessness. That's the best use of your time to focus with your governor for those funds.
Okay, so Melody, what else have we got in the queue?
Thanks. So you guys were pretty succinct, I imagine. Only because I think that you've answered pretty much everyone's questions. We do have one question. Is Homekeeper a HUD-approved CMS?
Yes, it is a HUD-approved CMS built on the Salesforce platform since, I think, 2016.
Great. That's all we have.
All right, that's great. So good. Let's move quickly on to the next part. So Ellie, do you want to take it from here?
Sure, thanks, Bruce. Hi, everybody. So we are going to move right into the meat of our presentation from different groups that are using ESG and other funding in order to conduct some tenant counseling work. So we're going to start with Laura Phelps, who's been on before, and she's going to talk about the program that she manages at United Tenants of Albany in upstate New York. Laura.
Hey, can you hear me? I had to switch phones.
We can hear you.
Great. So thank you for having me. My name is Laura Phelps. I'm the Executive Director of United Tenants of Albany. We're in Albany, New York, and we're a small nonprofit organization that's been in our community since 1973, so almost 50 years. The mission of United Tenants is to protect and promote tenants' rights to safe, decent, and affordable housing, with a special emphasis on those who have the greatest need or who experience the most severe problems, and to promote the development and preservation of more affordable housing. So the work that we're doing is extremely important in a time like this. So we have a number of direct services that we provide to the community. We're a really flexible, responsive organization that formed in response to emergent needs in 1973, and then we continue to really serve folks in a flexible and responsive way today. And so our services include a homeless prevention program where we have emergency rent assistance, court advocacy service, DSS intermediary assistance, a housing hotline, drop-in center, and special counseling for tenants in foreclosure. We do education and advocacy, tenant and landlord trainings, education for organizations, and services for other providers, and we assist with the formation of tenant associations, community organizing, and we do some legislative advocacy. So currently now with COVID-19, we're seeing some pretty serious renter needs on the ground, some needs that we had already been seeing and some new needs. We're certainly concerned that there's going to be mass evictions and overloaded courts as the New York State eviction moratorium is sort of coming to a close, and we're seeing some administrative orders coming down from the courts that have us concerned about when filings are going to begin to be accepted and when hearings are going to start moving again. We're already seeing on our hotline an overwhelming inability to pay rent among so many renters. We're seeing a lot of unlawful evictions and illegal lockouts, landlord harassment, horrible housing conditions, and folks are more trapped in their unsafe housing than they ever have been with stay-at-home orders, and folks very afraid of shelters, so really staying inside unsafe housing and struggling to sort of maintain their housing when they're not able to pay their rent. So moving on from there, we are able to use ESG funding to meet some of those needs that we talked about and to fund some of those services that I mentioned that we provide to the community. So ESG funding is a good, somewhat flexible funding source that allows us to directly prevent evictions and homelessness among folks who are imminently at risk of losing their housing. We're able to provide critical emergency interventions to folks who drop in or call the hotline, or who we meet in court who are actually in the midst of facing eviction sort of actively. We're able to assist with ongoing needs of tenants, so ESG funding funds counseling services that allows you to keep someone's case open for 90 days and to continue with follow-up and coordination throughout the duration of their sort of housing stability journey. And the funding allows us to also maintain community relationships with coalition work and continuum of care coordinated work within our community. And it also provides an opportunity to develop a greater understanding of systems within our organization, both in community work and through engagement with HMIS systems and HUD, so homeless management information systems, that you engage in if you receive ESG funding. So some of the activities, this I believe is a comprehensive list as far as I know that ESG will fund just in terms of eviction prevention. There are also other things that ESG funding can be utilized for, but at United Tenants, we use this for eviction prevention. And so the ones at the top that are underlined are the ones that United Tenants of Albany currently utilizes ESG funding for. The ones in the middle are the ones that United Tenants does provide. Those are services that we do provide to the community, but we do not use ESG funding to fund them. And then towards the bottom are other things that you could use ESG funds for, but United Tenants doesn't provide these services at all. So housing stability case management is a really heavily utilized resource at our organization, and we anticipate that it's going to become an even more emergent need in this really difficult time. Folks really need a level of case coordination, of being able to work with someone ongoing for a period of time to be able to actually stabilize their housing situation and maintain and sort of retain their housing over time. Because when you have that immediate sort of emergency where you are almost about to lose your housing and be evicted because of an unforeseen financial hardship, often that sort of immediate intervention where you obtain emergency financial assistance or assistance in court, you're still kind of dealing with the fallout of whatever your emergency was for a few months, and that case coordination can be very helpful. Landlord-tenant mediation is really important, educating both sides sort of about their responsibilities, about the laws that they're subject to, and why it's important that folks are following rules to be able to maintain housing stability. Tenant legal services, while we're not an actual legal service provider, we don't have attorneys. We have provided court advocacy assistance in Albany City Court now for 30 years, and ESG Funding has supported that service for a very long time. And then that direct emergency financial assistance to avoid eviction is really important in our community. We serve anywhere between 180 to 300, and this year we're anticipating probably closer to 500 families with emergency financial assistance payment to directly prevent evictions that are sort of happening because of non-payment of rent. We also provide assistance with utilities, so that's to make an emergency payment towards someone's utility bill because they're at risk of shut off for non-payment or unable to get utilities turned on because of a delinquency. Assistance with security deposits to get folks out of shelters or doubled up situations where they're staying with friends and family in overcrowded housing. And then some more work with utilities that we're able to do. And then down at the bottom are some other things that ESG funding could also be used for. So for us, something that's very important really in training our counselors and how we administer these services to the community are the requirements that HUD lays out as far as who is eligible to receive this funding in the community and how this allows you to maintain compliance with ESG programs. So folks have to be imminently at risk of homelessness and be able to demonstrate an imminent risk of losing their housing. So we do have to have tenants come in with an eviction notice, which sometimes can be a little bit frustrating because folks have to wait to be in a verified emergency and sometimes are not able to be proactive about the situations that they're in. We also have to be able to show that we're stabilizing the housing emergency and that there is a mechanism to ensure that folks retain their housing after we intervene. So there is a mandate about a certain percentage of folks that you help needing to retain their housing for a certain duration of time after you intervene. Tenants have to prove that they have no other resources available to them and that they've exhausted all entitlement programs, which is why we work closely with our local Department of Social Services to help folks access public benefits that they might be eligible for. There are income limits for ESG clients. Generally, they're 30% of area median income. We're hoping that potentially with this crisis, those income limits might go up. You have to be able to demonstrate that the rent at the apartment is reasonable, which can be difficult when there's a pretty serious lack of rent control and rent regulation in the country. So it's something that sometimes we struggle with. Housing quality standards, the apartment does have to pass an inspection, and in many of our communities, and certainly in Albany, we do have an issue of deteriorating housing stock. So we do at times have to mediate and have push landlords to make necessary repairs to be able to assist someone. And then case coordination and follow-up is a really crucial part of ESG eviction prevention programming. So that's it. If anybody has questions, please feel free to contact me. We've been providing this kind of programming for a long time now, and we're happy to help others who want to start serving their community in this way.
Great, thanks, Laura. I have one thing I wanted to ask you about. Could you expound a little bit more on your work in the courts? Because this is something we've been hearing about, that tenants are in greater need of legal representation, but it sounds like you're doing something to kind of assist tenants in court around legal issues. So if you could just talk a little bit more about that.
Sure. I was the court advocate at the organization for 4 years, and so the position and the service is very near and dear to my heart. We've been in Albany City Court for about 30 years, kind of maintaining a presence where we're trying to close the gap, because maybe at most 5% of tenants attend court for some proceeding for eviction with representation, while about 90% of landlords are represented. So you have a super unlevel playing field for folks when they're contending with this really confusing and intimidating system. So United Tenants is in court every morning while the hearings are going through. We bring our own caseloads with us of folks who came to us for help before they were petitioned. And then we also pick people up in court who are in the midst of an emergency. Because we're not attorneys, we're able to just meet them where they're at, de-escalate their crisis, and explain to them what their rights and options are in that situation to help them avoid eviction. So we do a level of mediation, advocacy, education, and dispute resolution to help people reach sort of different kinds of solutions for their housing matters that they are really the ones to define, and they're really the ones to achieve them, which also I think makes the service in some ways even more valuable than legal representation, because our clients sort of take it with them and learn a lot about the process and are empowered throughout.
Great, thanks for that. Thanks for that. All right, we're going to move to our next presenter, Russell Graves with the National Foundation for Debt Management. Russell's been on with us before as well, and Russell's going to talk to us about consideration of some alternative out-of-the-box type funding. Russell.
Yes, hello, good afternoon. My name is Russell Graves. I'm the Executive Director of National Foundation for Debt Management. Now, rental counseling is not a new type of counseling, but if your agency is anything like NFDM, you received hundreds of calls from renters in the last 30 days versus one or two a month in the last 10 to 20 years. And like NFDM, you've had to scramble to find ways to fund this counseling. And if we can move to the next slide, what we're going to try to do is come up with some creative thoughts of how we can provide counseling. Now, there are a number of places you can go to get this type of information. My favorite is, of course, our friends at National Housing Resource Center, but you can also go to your various networks, agencies, and things like that. They seem to work as well too. If we can move to the next slide. Now, the CARES Act came out, and they actually, for the Emergency Solutions Grant, $100 billion has been funded to date. And it is a wonderful source of funding. If we can go to the next page. Here we have the top 10 grantees for emergency solutions grants. New York City was being #1 with $50 million. Now, this non-entitlement, what that means is it goes to the non-direct emergency solution grant recipients. In other words, smaller municipalities and smaller counties that don't have a direct emergency solution grant. And so these are places you can go for that. If we go to the next page, we're talking about also from the CARES Act, the Cdbg CV, or coronavirus. There's been 2 rounds of funding. Now, what we have provided with this webinar is a copy of the allocation, so you can find all the allocations and where they go. There's $3 billion worth of funding that's already come out of this. And if we go to the next page, we're going to find out how you use this list to determine what is available and how it's available, okay? So in New York City, they got 102. Chicago, Texas, these are all the places that got the first round of funding. The first round of funding went to counties and municipalities for the most part. So when it says New York City, that's obviously the city. New York is, once again, the non-entitlement areas. The last round went directly, the $1 billion, the coronavirus second round of funding, went to the states themselves. Now, all these numbers are good, but how do you use these numbers to direct your fundraising activities? If we can go to the next page, we can figure this out. Now, National Foundation is a nonprofit, is a multi-state housing counseling agency, and as you can see, we are in Florida and New Jersey, and no, these aren't to size, they just happen to be the cutouts I have. If you want to figure out how to do this and figure out what's available for it to you, so in our network, the two states together have over $110 million. So what I did is I took this list, sorted it by cities. Atlantic City is the closest city to us. They got $786,000. So what me as an outreach guy went directly to Marty Smalls. Marty Smalls is the new mayor of Atlantic City after the old mayor was indicted for stealing some money. Marty Smalls is very receptive to our talks and different things. Then I went to Atlantic County. I went to the Atlantic County, in fact, Improvement Authority. Okay, they have 704, and I talked with them. We worked down the list. New Jersey went to the Department of Community Affairs, and I talked to my contacts there. And if they hand it down to the New Jersey Housing Mortgage Finance Agency, I've got people there. So what I'm doing is starting with a very small area and working out and capturing where these funds are going and see where we as an agency can be of assistance and help. Did the same thing in Florida. Went to Largo, talked to Arrow, went to Pinellas County, then I went to Florida itself, all these things. So what we start with is discussions on where this money is going to be spent, how it's going to be spent. Can we make housing counseling part of this, these funds? They have been receptive. I have worked very well with the city of Largo. I've worked very well with the county. And these are where we're going with Atlantic City. I've done some work, Atlantic County Improvement Authority. These are all places where I've built up. And if you refer back to last week's webinar, you have to do this to start opening up these dollars. These dollars, certainly not, my agency is not going to get $110 million, but what if I got, $11,000? Would that help? What if I got, $100,000, $110,000 to do this kind of counseling? It would help immensely. And so I've started those conversations, and I think you should use the CARES Allocation Act to start the conversations with your communities, with your counties, with your states. If we go to the next slide, another source of funding for rental counseling is obviously the PPP. Okay, if you are able to get it, your counselors' times are paid for through the Payroll Protection Act, and it's wonderful. Those things are make sure that we keep all of our counselors, we keep them all working. And if you have any funds from the HUD Comprehensive Housing Grant left, those are another way to fund this rental counseling. But you really have to be careful. And I'm sure you all know this, but it can't be said enough that these are both federal sources, and you cannot use both for the same activity. Otherwise, you duplicate benefits. It really is not something that you want to do. If we can go to the next slide, we'll talk about one of my, I seem to do this every time I talk, try to get back in on the disaster recovery. One of the places that HUD Housing Counseling has not really broken into very well, except for in the state of New Jersey, is the disaster recovery grants. We did a wonderful, we had a wonderful opportunity after Superstorm Sandy, and from the funds that they were handing out, somebody in the state said there was not going enough to LMI and limited English proficient clients. So they sued the state and added housing counseling as part of this grant, the Superstorm Sandy. And so my agency, which covered 3 counties, had used up to $500,000. Now, that's some serious funding. Now, and we get to another point of this, all housing counseling activities need to be performed by certified housing counselors after August 1st. And that's the, that's the requirement we're all under. That may be changed. They haven't changed it yet that I'm aware of. I heard there's talk about it because of the inability to take the test in a socially distanced way, but it's still there at the August 1st level. And so if any of these grants, these disaster recovery grants, are available, housing counselors really cannot be an afterthought. We have to band together and make sure that we are part of these grants, because the services after a disaster, including coronavirus, intersect so much with counseling, housing counseling, intersect with so much that we do, that we have to make sure that we're an integral and funded part. Right now, they're required to put it in there, but we don't get funding. My next slide is kind of thinking outside the box. I don't know if any of you have tried this, but have you talked to some of these funds that are created after a natural disaster, after an economic disaster, or even a coronavirus disaster? Rise Up New York had Tina Fey. She did a wonderful job. It was broadcast nationally as far as I know. That went to the Robin Hood Foundation, which is mostly food. However, the Jersey for Jersey, which had Bruce Springsteen, Bon Jovi, bunch of people on it, broadcast locally, had, brought in over $35 million. And while the first 4 rounds went to food, medical, hospitals, and food, the third basic need is housing. And so some of the later rounds of this may be for housing, at least that's what I'm being told. I did a search, COVID-19 LA County Response Fund. Now tonight at 7 o'clock, if you're in the Philadelphia area, as I know Bruce and Bunch are, Daryl Hall, Cless Love, Patty LaBelle is going to be in Philadelphia COVID-19 Fund. Natural disasters, we got some out of the Hurricane Sandy, New Jersey Relief Fund, but Nashville with Love, the Hurricane Harvey relief, which J.J. Watt Foundation had, Hurricane Irma Fund. I know I'm reaching back with some of these economic disasters. Yes, I was at Live Aid in the 80s. I went to that. It was a wonderful place to be. Farm Aid, Concert for Bangladesh, that's even a little older. But some of these things are there, and we have gotten past the first cut of some of these telethons and benefits. And if you can make it past the first cut, you're down to a good chance of being funded. These are wonderful opportunities for funds. I don't know if anybody's used them. This is just kind of me thinking outside the box. If anybody has any, I would love to hear them. If you could put them in the chat when we get to questions and answers. Any we can use, it'd be a wonderful thing for all of us. I think that's it, Ellie. Thank you.
It is, thanks. Okay, so we are going to move on to our next presenter, Lois Healy, who is the CEO of Affordable Homeownership Foundation in Florida. Lois.
Hi, welcome everybody. Lois Healy, Affordable Homeownership Foundation. I've been asked to speak on our rental housing counseling program that we started 5 years ago. We started it because rent prices started increasing and we had a lot of clients that were being evicted due to lack of money and the fact that rents went up 40% over the last 5 years. So we decided to go ahead and start a rental housing counseling program to try to find out what was causing the problem. After starting the program, we became an ESG provider, which we are no longer an ESG provider because the guidelines were so stringent at the time. We could only service people that were at 30% of AMI, which most of the clients that were calling in that were 30% of AMI were on Section 8 or other housing choice vouchers, which made them ineligible for any of the funding. So one of the major issues that we found with clients, and I'm sure everybody on this call sees it, is most of the clients that we saw had major budgeting issues. They didn't know how to manage their money, so that's where housing counseling came in. We wrote it into our HUD housing counseling program 5 years ago so that everybody would be able to be seen. We'd be able to fund it through that program. Also, whenever I'm writing any of the other small grants that we get from time to time, it's for rental counseling and for home ownership counseling and financial capabilities, which all of the rental counseling people fall under. The other thing that we found is because of the rent increases, people were doubling up, which was causing them to have an overcrowding issue, and they were being evicted because of the overcrowding. So basically, we turned the rental housing counseling program as trying to get these people level again, where they can eventually purchase a home, be a first-time home buyer. The problem with that was the housing prices in our area jumped twofold in the last 3 years. So housing prices that were 110 to 150, which most people could afford, are now in excess of 220,000. So basically that's it. We have continued to see clients through our rental housing counseling program on a regular basis. We get calls all the time. So they're either homeless or about to become homeless. So if they are homeless, it's because they've been evicted. So we try to work with landlords and try to get them rehoused. And that's our entire program.
Thanks, Justina. So excuse me, Lois. I wanted to just have you talk a little bit about, you said that you had an ESG program and then you weren't really able to access the funds adequately due to the income limitations. So talk a little bit, I think you mentioned it, but get a little bit more into detail about how you pivoted and why you pivoted and where those funds are coming from exactly.
Well, the ESG funds were funds that came through the county, our local county, and not every county has them. I found out because Collier County doesn't have any of the funding. Lee County does, Charlotte County does, but in limited format. We had to apply for and were awarded for 3 years in a row ESG funding, and basically it covered the rents, past due electric, first, last plus deposit if they were moving into a new apartment. But again, the income limitations were so stringent, they couldn't be on Section 8 or cash assistance or HUD-VASH. They didn't qualify. If they were self-employed, they must have proof of income, profit and loss statement for the past 6 months. And a lot of the small people that are self-employed really didn't have any of those type of things. We had to teach them how to do a profit and loss. We had to teach them how to keep good records and make sure that they didn't commingle funds so that they were able to get funding. And it was a lot of work for not a lot of money. We didn't get a lot of our expenses covered under this program. It didn't cover the actual counseling sessions. It just covered a few of our smaller bills. So coupling that with our HUD grant, we could get our counselors paid through the HUD grant. And again, they have to agree to 3 months of case management, which doesn't seem like a lot to us. But getting people to come back after they got their rent paid or their electric bill paid was very difficult because a lot of clients felt they didn't need it, even though they did. So those are just some of the things that we ran into. So we just decided that we would not use ESG anymore and just do this as a regular rental housing counseling program and find the funding through a series of smaller grants because it seemed to make more sense. We couldn't get them, we could refer them to the county to get the assistance because the county took the program back to get the rent paid for, the electric, the water. But then there's such an overwhelming need right now. And in the past few years, a lot of clients didn't get the help that they needed.
So are you continuing to see a large number of people coming through your program for this kind of assistance?
Yes, yeah. And it's mainly because the cost of rent has gone up so much. That's another reason for housing counseling, trying to teach them how to be a home buyer and teaching them how to budget their money. The financial capabilities counseling and coaching is a major part of the rental housing counseling program, because if they can understand that they need to stay on track and figure out how to do that, it benefits them in the long run.
Great, well, thank you for your time. And we are gonna move on now to Justina Fife, who's the Data Integrity and Compliance Manager with United Community Action Network. So UCAN is an organization in Oregon. And the other thing that is really helpful having Justina on is that she's also part of the Continuum of Care Consortium in Oregon. And so she can talk with some detail about ESG funding and particularly the impact that this kind of funding and rental counseling has in rural communities. So Justina.
Hello there.
Take it away.
Thank you. Yes, I am the Data Integrity and Compliance with UCAN, but I am also the chair of the Rural Oregon Continuum of Care, or our ROC agency. Rural Oregon Continuum of Care encompasses 26 counties. Most of them are extremely rural, and some of them do border urban areas. So there's quite a diversity there. Housing vacancies across the state range anywhere from less than 3% to less than 1%. So there's not a lot of rental vacancies at this time, and hasn't been for the last few years. So it's been a real struggle to try to make sure that we get people housed. And this pandemic isn't helping any because of the moratorium on evictions. So therefore, we don't have any new vacancies, which we don't want anyway. And the ROC and our COC grantees work very closely with HUD, so we do have a very good relationship with them. Now, the ROC used to be under the Oregon Housing Community and Services Agency, which is a part of the state. And they operated the ROC for many years. And about 9 years ago, it was determined that we would do better as a standalone. So we moved away from the state and into our own organization. And at the time that OHCS had the ROC, they also received ESG funds, and they continue to receive ESG funds, and they write all of the work plans and everything for those funds. And this ROC is just starting to get involved in that process after many years of trying to get involved, because according to the Hearth Act, we're supposed to be over those funds. So it's been a struggle in that respect, but it's working out. OHCS, when they received the funds from HUD, they disperse them down to the community action agencies, and United Community Action Network is one of those community action agencies. UCAN comprises of 2 counties in Southwest Oregon, Douglas and Josephine, and we are not a housing counseling agency. We were for a long time, but about 10 years ago, we let that go. And even though we are not classified as a housing counseling agency, a lot of the tools that were learned being a housing counseling agency have continued. So we continue to work with people so that they learn how to budget and other ways to maintain their housing. So that has been an ongoing, even though we're not a dedicated housing counseling agency. UCAN provides a multitude of services to the communities, including rent and deposit assistance, energy assistance, veteran assistance through the SSVF program, medical transportation, food pantries, Head Start programs in Douglas County, retired senior volunteer programs, tax preparation, along with quite a few others. We do not have the large variety of services found in metro and urban areas, such as large apartment complex or partner agencies with housing and or housing funds. And most of the rural areas do not have emergency shelters, which makes it even harder for the large number of homeless that we have. We do have a lot of the basic services for families in needs, including DHS with STAPS and TANF, drug and alcohol programs, mental health, debt counseling, transportation, Section 8 and VASH. So that's pretty much all across the country. The variety of funding sources, in addition to ESG and COC, we have housing stabilization funds, which comes from the DHS office, and we do have collaboration plans with the 2 DHS offices in our agency to get those funds out the door to people in need. Emergency Solutions Grant, Emergency Housing Assistant, which is a state fund, State Homeless Assistance Programs, or SHAP, which is used for shelter and outreach, Community Development Block Grant for rental assistance and energy assistance, and Community Service Block Grant. And we just recently received eBoard COVID funds, and the eBoard is a part of the state agencies that have gotten together and determined what was needed and how it could be done as far as COVID goes. We have low housing vacancies right now. We have high homeless population, that including doubled up. Like here in Josephine County in January, we counted over 1,400 in our small community that are homeless and doubled up. We have high rents on the available units and high deposits, which can be either twice the monthly rent amount, or sometimes they will go as high as 3 times the rent amount, but we do not pay that. Low income people, low wages, Social Security, SSI, unemployment, pensions. And then we have many seniors in our areas that have lost their units due to the huge rent increases, accompanied by high medication and doctor bills, inability of families to help with support. And we've also been looking at creative housing in order to keep some of the people off the street, like working with motels where they actually provide a lease so that we can put people in housing and keep them safe. Identifying buddies and shelters who may want to room together, so they get a 2-bedroom or they share a 1-bedroom, whichever the case may be, and they actually get housed versus both staying in an emergency shelter. And we've also looked at working with RV parks for those that do have an RV, that we can help pay with the rent of those units. Most of our programs, however, do not support assistance with mortgage. So those we have to refer elsewhere. And how UCAN is helping. This February, we were able to, for the first time, open up a warming center for the homeless. It was only supposed to go through the end of March. But when COVID hit, the state gave us additional funding so that we could keep that open for 2 additional months. So it will be closing the 31st of May, which has helped a lot of them in a lot of different ways. Not only did it keep them housed when the weather was cold and rainy, but it also provided a good meal that helped build up the immunities of the homeless population who normally eat fast food or whatever they can find. So having a good meal has been very beneficial to those folks. In addition, UCAN staff have been working virtually since March 23rd, still continuing to work with those that call for assistance. Our application process has been done over the phone instead of face-to-face, and then required documents they have been able to submit to the case managers using email, fax, or a text, so that we have complete applications other than signatures, which we will get after this pandemic is over and we can actually meet with them.
Justina, I'm gonna break in for just a second. Could you talk a little bit about what funding it is that you're using for all these wonderful programs that you're talking about, and how folks might think about accessing those funds in their regions?
I'm getting there. I am getting there. All of the data that we receive goes into a homeless management information system, and we have developed a way for our current funding to be inclusive of the COVID, and all of the COVID funds that we're actually receiving are designated for that, so we can track the people that are receiving funds based upon this pandemic. Now, with the e-board funds, what we're doing with those is we've already started a wait list, and with those, we're doing a quick phone call. We've reduced the application so that it's more specific for these funds, and once we determine that they meet the funding criteria, which is less than 50% AMI, and that they've been affected by COVID, those applications are being mailed out to them. And then once those applications come back, then we will be processing those in a first come, first serve. So that's just our e-board COVID funds that we just recently received. The goal with these funds is to help people from April through the end of June with their rent, so that we can alleviate some of the anxieties and the fears that they're going to be evicted over because not being able to pay their rent. And by going through the end of June, that will help them pay for other things that the household needs, including, paying maybe a utility bill or more food or whatever the case may be. And these funds are strictly for COVID, and being able to track those helps as well. The ESG funds that we get, we will be serving those that are imminently at risk, less than 30%. They have to meet the FMR and pass the HQS and all of that. So once we get those funds, then hopefully we can take the people that we've been serving through June and maybe continue helping them for another month or so, or help additional people that we weren't able to serve with the e-funds. In order for people to access those, they can contact any community action agency across the state of Oregon, because all of those funds are going out to the community action agencies, and let them know what they need, and they will start with that application process with them. Any questions?
Okay, thank you. Yes, I'm gonna go to questions now. We have several. So, and thank you, Justina, for your presentation. I'm gonna go right back to Tiffany. Are you still on, Tiffany? You had yourself unmuted for a second there. Are you there, Tiffany? Okay, I'm gonna move on. It looks like you're unmuted, Tiffany, but I'm not hearing you speak.
Hi, can you hear me now?
Oh yes, I can hear you. Yes. Okay.
Yeah,
So somebody had a question about for Homekeeper. What are your recommendations for organizations with few resources to implement tracking measures and conduct extensive research on what is COVID-related cases?
I think, I mean, regardless of how you do it, if you're having paper files, even just renaming your files if they are COVID related, I think there's simple, very low-tech ways to do it. It's just you need to plan with your staff ahead of time on how you're going to segment your files and which metrics you actually care about. Are you going to be tracking the increase? Are you going to be tracking the change in services provided? And that you pick what you're going to be tracking ahead of time, because that will save you time if you have a small staff, as opposed to going back in time and having the counselors recode all of their past cases and activities. So that's more the point, is to think ahead, even if you're not using a fancy system, or if you come up with a very low tech way of using a hashtag or something in your case notes, so that you can go back and report more easily going forward. Hopefully that answers your question.
Sounds great. Thank you. Bruce, I think that this question may be more for you to answer. Foreseeing the need for housing counseling services due to the pandemic, do you believe that there will be enough certified counselors on board to handle it, and could this serve as a need to extend the certification process?
It absolutely does. There's no question at all that we were at 50% on passage rates in March, and certification rate. So there's a big gap, and I know some agencies are adding staff again to meet the demand. So there's no question that this absolutely amplifies the need for getting an extension. We're still hopeful to get one. I'm still surprised it's taken this long, but we are continuing to push for it, and continue to be told that something's in the works.
Okay. And I believe that NCRC has circulated a sign-on letter. I don't know what the deadline was on that, and that we circulated it through the Leaders in Housing Counseling list. So if you didn't already see it, look for it. It came from Bruce, and consider signing on. It's the letter about a couple of things, but one of them about extending the certification deadline. Somebody asked about recording the webinar. We always record, and we will send out a link to the recording and any other information that might come out of this call. We usually get the email out by the end of the day, Friday, or first thing Monday morning. If you don't see an email, you can always go to our website and search for it there under the media tab. We put all of our recordings up there. The one thing that you will find in the email is a copy of the PowerPoint if you were unable to download the slides from the webinar. Sometimes it's hard for people, I know, because it's heavy data and it doesn't always get accepted by everybody's computers. So I'm not sure which person this is for, if this is for Laura or for Lois, but I suppose either one of you could answer it. Based on some of the rental requirements, including the housing quality standards, how long does it normally take you to get payment out, and are you normally providing more than 1 month? I think that was Lois that talked about that.
This is Lois. Usually it's a 2-week to 3-week approval process that we have to go through. And with ESG, the money comes out of our account, so we just have to submit the paperwork to the county to get reimbursed. So it's 2 to 3 weeks from start to finish, with clients bringing in their documents, if they bring in their documents on time. And then once we verify everything, we go ahead and cut the check or disperse the funds electronically, and then submit the paperwork once a month to get reimbursed by whatever entity is issuing, in our case, the county. Did that answer the question?
I think so. Sounds like it. I think this is also for you, Lois. Can you elaborate more on the house inspections? Do your are your staff involved, or do you have to work with other entities?
We didn't have staff inspections on our ESG program, so it wasn't a part of the ESG program that we had.
Okay, Laura, do you all do house inspections?
We do. We do an inspection for every eviction prevention case that we are ready to approve. So like Justina said, a lot of folks don't bring their documents in on time or sometimes never bring them in. So we hold off on doing an inspection until all the documentation has been submitted and we're prepared to make a payment. And then we do an inspection, go out and see the apartment, make sure that it meets a number of standards that are put forth by HUD, so it's not something that we're having to sort of like make up as we go along. We also, the counselors have to get lead paint certified, and part of the inspection, if there's a woman who is pregnant or a child under the age of 6, then the counselor also needs to inspect for lead paint. And as long as it meets all the standards, then you're able to move forward and approve the case. But if it doesn't, then you get put in kind of a situation because you have to ask the landlord to make the repair, but most nonprofits don't have any kind of authority to force the landlord to make a repair, and sometimes the situations do get sticky.
So that sounds like it's your staff that you have trained to go and do the inspections.
Staff have to get trained to do inspections and get lead paint certified, and then go out to the person's apartment.
Okay, thank you. For ESG funding, there's a homelessness prevention portion and rapid rehousing portion, is this person's understanding. Is the homelessness prevention limited to one-time payments? And if so, how do you show retained housing ongoing stability over time? Or do you provide assistance over a longer period? So I think that's, any one of you could answer this question, I guess.
This is Lois. It is a one-time payment for 1 year. They can come back for assistance after a year. And I think that's it. As far as the assistance goes, they have to, as far as getting the documentation to us, that's the case management piece for us to keep monitoring them to make sure that they stay on track and remain housed. But like I said, you can't make these people come in. They have to want to come in. We make them sign a document which states they're going to come back, but if they don't come back, there's nothing we can do about it.
I would add on United Tenants, and so in some situations we can do an additional payment, but generally that's not the need. It's more providing case coordination and assisting folks in accessing public benefits that they're entitled to ongoing. So you make an eviction prevention payment and then help the person sustain their housing for 3 months by meeting their individual needs through case management. And then after 6 months, we follow up with the client and do a check-in and see how they're doing and interview them.
So that's how you show that they retained housing and ongoing stability over time. You have those case management notes, essentially.
Yep, case management, and then that 6-month interview.
Okay. How does the application process, what is the application process for ESG funds? Do tenants have to apply online or need to go to a HUD agency?
This is Lois again. They start with an intake. They call in. Then we give them a list of documents that they need to bring for their appointment. Set the appointment. Once they call us and tell us they have all the documents together, that's when we set the appointment.
So the ESG funds are administered through some entity, whether it's the state or the county or the city, depending on where you are. And those funds are then distributed out to different organizations to manage programs. Is that right?
That's correct. And they're all cost reimbursement as far as I know.
Okay. So the tenants would be applying to the organization that has the funds available. And correct me if I'm wrong, any of you that are on the call, that when it comes to the ESG funds, an organization may use ESG funds for various things, not necessarily providing rental assistance. So it depends on how an organization chooses to use their funds, correct?
It's how the entity that's giving the organization the funds designates how those are being used. So however they wrote their grant to get the ESG funds, and however the ESG funds grant in their particular area. For example, we got ours through the county. The county had their guidelines as to what the monies could be used for. In our case, it was rental assistance to move somebody out of homelessness into housing, which would be first, last, plus deposit and utility deposits, and just to pay past due rents. But it's all in whoever the entity is that writes the grant is how the funds are allocated to the agency that does the actual counseling, I believe, and at least in our case.
Anybody else want to pile on to that, to answering that question?
This is Justina, and here in Oregon, even though OHCS is the one that writes for the funds from HUD, they also send out a work plan for the community action agencies to complete, and the community action agency decides how they're going to use those funds, and it's usually in conjunction with what OHCS has already put in their work plan. So you could have an agency that does more street outreach and rapid rehousing, and another one does more homeless prevention. So it depends upon the agency and the need of the local area.
Okay, great. Let's see. So this person says, our agency does not currently counsel clients, but the need is there. This doesn't designate any one group, but I would imagine that this would be useful from any one of you. Would you be willing to share your current plan in place to counseling rental clients? So I would imagine that specifically your HUD work plan would be useful.
Yes, I could share that with anybody if they wanted it. That would be no problem.
So any of you who are willing to share that, email it to me, and then I can distribute it through the listserv.
Okay.
Great. Lois, somebody just agreed with you that clients do not want counseling once they have received funds. Somebody wondered why, Justina, you aren't using electronic signatures.
We haven't quite got that far. I mean, our technology is coming in that direction, but we just haven't got that piece implemented yet.
Okay. Okay, so this person is asking, how many people end up not receiving funding because of that requirement? I'm not sure which requirement is being referred to. So the person who answered that question, asked that question, if you could specify which requirement you're referring to. And this person also mentions that they're concerned that barriers are something that can't be supported during the COVID relief. And these are questions for Laura.
Okay.
Yeah, I would offer, I think regardless of which specific barrier the person with the question is getting at, we approve with the amount of ESG funding that we get now 100 cases a year, but we screen and reject closer to 500 because of something about them that causes them to be ineligible, like where they live, how much income they have, their housing quality standards, the rent being unreasonable, you know, any number of things.
Okay. Oh, she said it was the quality standards not being met. About how many are being rejected and high barrier to help right now. She can't imagine doing site visits.
Yeah, especially, I mean, in a lot of cities, where we're going to see the highest needs, it's the same cities where you have the most deteriorated housing. So it's also incumbent on organizations to be fighting for better code enforcement and other things as well.
Okay. And then what I think is the final thought. This person is more concerned about the training process for new staff becoming HUD certified and would like to see more flexibility from HUD on having people in a training period so they can work and learn while taking the courses to become certified. Just a thought, if there is any negotiation that happens. Bruce, did you want to comment at all about that?
I'm sorry, ask the question again.
Sure. This was just it's not a question, it's really just a thought that this person would like to see a better situation for new staff who are becoming HUD certified around training, for there to be more flexibility during the training period so that they can work and learn while taking the courses to be certified. Just a thought, if there is any negotiation that happens.
Yeah. I think that issue's been raised a lot. I don't think it's gotten any traction from HUD. They feel kind of locked in on the certification issue. Might be worth revisiting again. I think the biggest advantage right now is if we can get a delay in the certification deadline, so that groups really do need to train and to staff up quickly and have some challenges around the training in the current environment, but they're manageable. But the certification is really not going to work in this current environment. So it's all a good point, best I can say.
Okay, and one final question did pop in for Tiffany. This person would like to know, how long does it take to input a client into the Homekeeper program?
Depends what, I mean, it's relatively fast, a matter of a couple of minutes. If you're putting in historical information and trying to transition by hand, that would be longer. But to set up a client, it's just a couple of minutes. You're collecting, income, assets, debt, all of your intake information. And if you have a web-facing portal, like an online application, that would all come in auto-magically, as I say, so without much time or effort.
Okay, and that's it for our questions. And I just popped into the slide deck this link to the FHFA multifamily loan lookup tool. While you can't look up a smaller 1 to 4 family, you can look up the multifamily. So at least that is something that can be learned. And with that, I hand it back to you, Bruce.
Okay, good. Well, at this point, just remind people that we're still accepting memberships at NHRC and renewals. Really appreciate the fact that so many of you have renewed already, and brought in a number of new memberships. Do understand it's a difficult time for organizations, and certainly if the timing's right for this, we get that, and we'll be around, and we'll be around when things get better too. But really appreciate everybody who's stepped up. And the credit reporting is the discount is still available. And then just a reminder on Savvy, the online student loan service, that's now free. So even though you got a discount with us, no point in using it. You can get it for free through July 31st and or July 1st. And definitely that's available for you and for your staff and for your clients. And it really is a good service for people who are having trouble with their student loan, and certainly part of the solution for people who may have been laid off. So good to use and take advantage of. I think the other big news is our call next week. So we'll just flip over to the last slide. And so actually, Ellie, do you want to describe a little bit about what it's going to be?
Sure. So we have heard from many of you that you were seeing some concerning items popping up on people's credit reports, that people were being put into forbearance just because they called and asked a question, even though they didn't ask to be put into a forbearance, and that it was showing up on their credit report, and some issues with scoring, and how is this all going to impact people. after the crisis is over, after they're done with their forbearance, and so on. So we were able to get Kelly Cochran with FinReg Lab to talk with us and be on our call next week. She's really knowledgeable about credit reporting and about how all of these things are happening, and they are following this. So she's going to give us a lot of really useful information about what to be looking for. She's going to give some potential thoughts on what you might want to advise your clients on. And she's also looking for information from all of you about what you're seeing, because they are really trying to follow this and figure out what needs to happen next and what should be done going forward. So that is our call next week. And she is the only person on our call next week. Will probably be just 1 hour to give her the opportunity to say whatever she needs to say and give all of you the opportunity to ask all of your questions.
Great, and that's it for us for today. Thanks so much, everybody. Really appreciate the great work you're doing out there, and we'll talk to you next week. Thanks.